When we talk about image, it's not just what you're wearing. If your online presence isn't really, really tight, then you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're not nailing it.
That's Mike Oxman, aka the best dressed man in the room. Mike's a men's image consultant at Henry A Davidson, a men's custom tailor here in Philly, PA. What I like to say is, while I help you look your best online, Mike helps you look your best in real life. And that's what today's episode is all about: the importance of crafting your authentic image for your personal brand. Together, we'll learn the ABCs of your personal brand's image.
Appearance, behavior, and communication. When all three of those elements are aligned, then you are putting forth the most genuine image.
How to wear clothes that are authentic to you while attracting your ideal audience.
The really fun challenge for me, where I can have a guy, he's got one foot on this side of the line where he is dressing authentically, and another foot on the other side of the line where he's dressing appropriately for what it is that he's doing.
And the difference between style and fashion and how that relates to your content strategy.
The goal is that no matter what I dress you in, you will look your best now, 10 years from now, and if I could put you in a time machine 50 years ago.
So tune in and let's learn some shit about our personal brand image here on this episode of Brand Science. There's such a correlation between what you do and what I do kind of on the online space, right? You're kind of like the in real life personal brander, right?
Yes.
And so image consulting, men's fashion, that can kind of take a few different forms. So what I want to do for us as the audience is to kind of establish what that actually is. So take us through that process. Imagine I and the audience are coming into Henry A Davidson for the first time. We are, let's say, business consultants. We sell high-end people business consultations. We're constantly in rooms with high-value individuals. We're going to conferences and we create online content as well, right? We create reels and TikToks and videos for LinkedIn and such. We're coming in because we want to start selling more online and in person. So where do you start, and then kind of what's the finished result there?
Sure. So that's a really, really good question. There's a lot wrapped up into what you asked, honestly. So the way that we start off a relationship with any client, realize that, we start off as a prospect, is actually we don't have anybody walk in the door. We actually just get on a phone call real quick. We actually redesigned our website a few months ago with the help of our marketing guy, and just designed with a whole bunch of buttons that say schedule a free consultation. The idea there is that sets you up with a Calendly link where you set up a 15-minute introductory phone call with us. Because before anything else, like, we have a very, very consultative process. We need to be on the same page. I need to know, like, I'm curious, of course, how you found us, but, what kind of goals are you looking to accomplish? And that doesn't necessarily mean what type of clothing might I make for you, like as a custom tailor, but sort of like what you just got into, like, who are you with a capital W? What do you do? What kinds of people are you in front of? What audiences are you in front of? What type of industry do you work in? What kind of verticals do you try to sell into? These are the kinds of questions that, when they get answered, they help me to create a roadmap, which would say, if I'm working with Dave, for example, in addition to, I would say, evergreen things like Dave's body type, the shape of his face, the coloring that goes on in and around his face. In addition to that, the answers to those questions will ultimately inform, these are the types of garments that I would make for you. And then as far as how they fit you, what colors we focus on, that sort of thing, that is more informed by what I can see of you and your body.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I actually stumbled upon the concept of color analysis the other day, actually.
Yeah, tell me more.
The idea of, like, you basically go to this website and upload a picture of yourself, and then you click on your skin color, and then you click on your eye color, and you click on your hair color. And then it gives you this result of, you're a cool autumn, or like a warm summer, or something like that. And then it gives you all the colors that are associated, that are best matched to your skin tone and your vibe and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Is that kind of similar to what you're kind of taking? Are you the human version of kind of that analysis?
I'm not going to position myself as the be all end all on that,
Yeah.
but it's the way that we look at it here is that yes, it is kind of similar. I'm not going to classify somebody necessarily as you're a winter or you're a fall or an autumn, whatever the case may be. That actually harkens back to an old. When I say old, I want to say maybe 30, 40 years ago. There was a program that my aunt, my mother's sister, did called "Color Me Beautiful,"
Hmm.
and it was very much geared at women at the time. But the idea would be you go to some consultant and they look at your skin tone and the undertones of your skin, your hair color, your eye color, and they tell you you're a winter, so therefore you should be wearing blacks and grays
Right.
and icier blues, whatever the case may be. So what the way that I do it is, I would say, a little bit more simple. The way that I like to talk about it is so you're a guy. When was the last time that, or rather, I should say, when did your dad teach you? Okay, these are the kinds of shirts that you should be wearing. And these are the kinds of ties that you should be wearing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I
It
really
didn't
would
happen.
go off of what he wore when he
Sure.
went out. That's like monkey see, monkey do with that.
Right, exactly. And so especially for men of, I would say, like from Generation X onward, so like Gen X, millennials, and now Gen Z kids, um, young men tend to not have received that kind of color education about themselves in the same way that a lot of, at least the women in my life, have received it. It's like
Mm.
you're 13, 14 years old, your mom teaches you how to put on makeup and like this is how to look at the coloring in your face.
Hmm.
If I ask a guy, like, oh, so what colors are good for you?
Right.
He would say, well, I'm a white guy, I'm a black guy, like whatever the case may be. And it's like, well, no, look underneath. I don't know if it's immediately apparent, but I have pink undertones in my skin,
That's
and depending on how you can see it, I have blue eyes. So when I wear pink and blue underneath my face, I look alive and I look flush with color. It looks you look vibrant, I guess and what that does is that creates, I would say, the most impactful, positively impactful visual image that you could put forth. So part of my job is to suss that out and really look at a guy and tell him like, okay, actually, earth tones are going to look really, really good on you. And that's going to make you look your best. But there's a lot more that goes into it than just that. There's a calculus. If somebody's telling me, yeah, I'm going to a bank to apply for a mortgage, which is rarer nowadays since so much stuff is done online. But
Yeah.
if that were to happen, then I would say, okay, very good. Well, no matter what it's like, I'm putting you in a navy blue suit or I'm putting you in a charcoal gray suit, and we'll make that determination, based on some of your coloring. But even if like an olive green jacket would have been best for you, it would still not be the thing that I would suggest because there is a psychology behind color as well.
Yeah.
And part of that is, are the colors that you're wearing engendering, let's say, reliability, credibility,
That's
trustworthiness?
the interesting part, like the color theory of it all. I mean,
Mhm.
largely for an online personal brand, your end result is to attract clients and business opportunities.
Sure.
You might get maybe clients that come in and say, "Hey, I'm a single guy and I'm looking to find a life partner and I
Hmm.
want to attract someone in the
Yes.
more romantic sense." So maybe there's a little bit of a different element there, but is there any, I don't know if this is out of your purview here, but is there any elements to coloring and then how that represents in real life and then how it could maybe be portrayed online? Is there a mixing of maybe coloring gets lost if you're recording yourself, or like better colors just look online, or is it just a matter of like if you look good in blue in real life, wear blue when you're creating videos as well?
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer it, but I'm happy to bullshit my way through
Sure,
answering
yeah, as
it.
we all
Yeah.
do.
So it's, I would say that generally speaking, wear colors that make you look your best. And of course, if you need guidance on that, we'll share my contact info later. But um, whether how that translates to camera is, it is ultimately going to be different. And the reason that I know this is that it happens all the time when I'm working with a groom. for example. We make a lot of wedding clothes, as you might imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And if a guy shows up maybe without his fiance or without all of the other decision makers who might be involved in what he wears, ultimately we're looking through swatches of fabrics and he's taking pictures and he's texting them to his fiance, whomever. And I could be looking at a blue fabric and looking at the picture, you're like, that is gray. And it's fundamentally different. So what was the it was a meme like what 7-8 years ago,
Oh, the
like
dress,
is that dress gold or
golden,
is the
yeah,
dress
golden blue
yeah
or whatever.
whatever it
Yeah.
was. Yeah, and like I'm sure families were broken up over over responses to that.
Yeah.
But really what it hammers home is that color does show up totally differently on a camera than it does on in person.
Right.
So but with that said, the color in your face, depending on the camera that you use, the screen that is being viewed on, that's going to change as well. So my suggestion would be, unless there is a video expert out here somewhere in the world who would push back on this, and I'd be open to hearing about it, my suggestion would be to start with looking your best in natural light, and everything else will fall from there.
Mm-hmm.
But I do love what you said about how online personal branding is so in line with what I do, which is like IRL or like meat space personal branding. It's huge. When we talk about image, it's not just what you're wearing. It's I think you and I have talked about this before, where we like to talk about here the ABCs of image: appearance, behavior, and communication. And the idea being that when all three of those elements are aligned and in sync, then you are putting forth the most genuine image that you could possibly put forth. And of course, what that does is it makes it easier to build trust with people, makes it easier to build relationships. And, for those of us who are concerned about closing business, it makes it easier for you to close business, makes it easier to, land the girl, land the guy, like whatever the case may be. And the way that you appear online nowadays in 2024, that is huge. Like, I don't need to tell you this. I mean, this, it's a fact, right? Your personal brand, your company brand, whatever the case may be, if your online presence isn't like really, really tight and really refined and really in line with like trying to communicate accurately who you are, what you do, and what kind of value you might add to any given relationship, then you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're not nailing it.
100%. That's why I love that we're talking today, because you really are kind of the in IRL version of kind of what I help people do online. And how I compare it to is this idea that the more I thought about the idea of what I help people do is really finding their perfect and authentic wardrobe that they feel most comfortable with online. And when I say wardrobe, for me, is kind of like a metaphor of content style and format. So some people are just a little bit more comfortable in front of a camera. Some people are better writers. If you are in front of a camera, what kind of video are you recording? Is it a talking head video, or are you going to go up, be kind of more like the man on the street doing interviews? Are you doing demonstrations? And I kind of liken the idea of content formats to wardrobes, and there are different formats, and then within those formats there are different styles and colors and fits, and you want to find the wardrobe that makes you feel most comfortable and confident in, because when you find that, you're showing up super authentically, right? If you don't feel confident in that wardrobe, then you're going to be a little squirmy when you're out there, and then people see that and they don't have the trust and the like that you're trying to go for. Can you kind of make that comparison then with when it comes to when you're fitting someone and presenting them with an option? Is there typically or ever some friction of like, here's what I want to put you in, outfit you in, and then go, I don't know if this feels like me, or I've never worn something so tight before, or, whatever, right? So that I assume the end result is that you want them to feel comfortable in what they wear and confident in what they wear, because when they're comfortable, they'll feel more confident, right? If they look good in what they wear, they're obviously going to be a little bit more confident. So can you kind of talk to the idea of like outfitting someone so that they look their best and that they are comfortable, and then that kind of results in their confidence?
Absolutely. So I like that you brought that up, particularly around how the clothing fits. Um, Depending on the guy that I work with, everybody's got a different fit preference. And some guys prefer something that's a little bit more, we'll say, classic, relaxed. And I have some guys who prefer things that are, trimmer, more modern, that sort of thing. What I will never do is put anyone on either end of a continuum that I call the shape drape continuum. So there is shape to clothing and there is drape. I don't want anyone on either extreme. What I want to do is find out where on that continuum you might lie and how do I inform that decision. Part of that is whatever your personal taste might be. I do want to solicit whatever a guy's personal taste might be, but your body type has a lot to do with this. And furthermore, the audience that you're in front of will inform that as well. And I think that that really speaks to what you do because here your audience being the entire internet. Part of this is like, how are we going to show up? And I actually like that you had mentioned, like there are some people that could be talking heads videos, could be demonstrations, could be a number of different things, translating to a bunch of, different wardrobes. And this really is so in line with just the idea of like dressing for a particular occasion, dressing for a particular audience. So, like, yeah, I'm wearing a blue suit and tie today, but tomorrow I'm going to be running around with my kid like I'm going to wear jeans and sneakers. It's a different application. Now, I still want to look nice. My clothing is still going to fit me well. The colors will all be coordinated, patterns will be coordinated, all that stuff. But I don't have the same audience.
Right.
I might not even have an audience, for that matter. I might just be the audience, and I want to look nice for the sake of just looking nice because it makes me feel good. But there are different ways to dress, and it is possible to overdo it. It's possible to overdress. Every so often, I've spoken with guys who, depending on where they are, like oftentimes it'll be in like the commercial real estate space, and they find themselves talking with like general contractors and stuff like that. You show up to in a suit and tie to a meeting with a GC, like he's gonna what that's gonna do is exactly what you kind of hinted on, which is like there's something about this that I don't trust, and
Mm-hmm.
it might not. It's probably not even going to be a conscious thing. It's just something that the subconscious picks up on, and when something just doesn't smell quite right, we can tell.
Mm-hmm.
That's where, and I think you also mentioned authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
which I love because it's actually one of my company's core values. Our core values are be real, which is to be reputable, be extraordinary, be authentic, and be learned is the word that we use. And authenticity, anybody, it's basic human psychology. People can sniff out somebody who isn't being authentic pretty much immediately. And it's really hard to come back from that. If you come off like you're putting on airs, it's a first impression.
Right.
And you can really tank whatever your goal might be if you are not being authentic. And I think that you probably run into this is where in the online space, just like here, when I'm dressing somebody, like we just aren't educated on like, what am I supposed to do? I want to be authentic. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what that actually means in terms of the practical application.
Right. No, 100%. I mean, that's one of the core areas that we focus on early on is, okay, what does authentic mean for you? And we drive that through the vessel of like topics to talk about and ways to talk about it. And I think on your end, it's more like, okay, what type of clothing is most authentic, because each piece of clothing kind of tells a different story to the person, the viewer, the perceiver. And is there any instances where are there any common mistakes that people make when it comes to that, where maybe they're trying to tell a certain story with their clothing, but the decision that they made is just completely far off? Is there things that maybe like, oh, I just wanted to kind of dress down, but by that decision, they're maybe giving the wrong impression to the wrong audience? Is there any, just I guess like the most common mistake you see when a client comes in for kind of a fashion overhaul, if you will?
Sure, sure. I would, for what it's worth, I would probably call it more of a style overhaul as opposed to a fashion overhaul, and I'm happy to get into the minutiae of that.
Let's do that in a bit. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But in any case, I would say that more often than not, it happens when somebody comes in asking to make a suit. So I'm a custom tailor. The custom tailoring world is very steeped in tradition, comes from England, Italy, almost 200 years of history at this point. And what do people think of when they think a custom garment? They think, okay, well, a suit, of course. In the year 2024, a few years out from a pandemic where like everybody was wearing shorts and sweatpants and t-shirts and all sorts of stuff for a while, the world is a lot more casual than it once was, and it was going in that direction even before the pandemic. But COVID really like put the pedal to the metal with that. And so I will oftentimes have introductory conversations with guys, and they're like, "Yeah, like I need a suit." Like, okay, well, what for? I mean, like, yeah, every guy needs one suit. Like, like get a gray suit, a blue suit, so you can go to a wedding, a funeral, a traditional job interview, like a nice dinner, something like that, just a workhorse to have. But more often than not, I talk with a lot of guys where I'm like, okay, so you'd like a suit. Great. Like, tell me what you do. Who are the kinds of people you're in front of? And come to find out that actually they would be much better suited, pardon the pun, they'd be much better suited to like a funky sport jacket and a pair of custom jeans. Or like maybe I need to make you some made to measure polos and a couple of custom sweaters. Like maybe that's actually what your lifestyle is.
And how do you take that into consideration? What are you looking at to make that determination?
So one, asking before anything, especially when I'm first starting off a relationship with a guy, I like to get a sense of where his closet is at that point in the conversation. Just because somebody is talking to me doesn't mean that they don't have clothes to wear. He might say like, yeah, I bought a suit from Brooks Brothers like a few years ago, and it's like, it's perfectly good. Happy to have you take a look at it and let me know if I'm right or wrong. But like, I don't see that as really a pain point. Unless I'm like, okay, great. So you've got that blue suit covered. So now we can actually move on to something else. The idea is, the way that I look at it is, we treat wardrobe building like you would treat building a house. If you don't have a solid foundation, putting a third floor up there is going to be pretty useless because it's going to come crashing down. It's not useful. So when we do that, we wind up with closets that have a lot of like really cool one-off pieces that don't really work together. They don't tell a cohesive story about who this person is and like what they're about. So again, if anything, I think probably the most common mistake is assuming that you need to wear suits as often as maybe we did 15, 20 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like what you were saying in terms of kind of the foundation. It sounds like there's maybe this element of a through line throughout your style, maybe that is, I would assume, kind of representative of who you are. So maybe it's not just the fit and how it actually fits on you, but like the story you're trying to tell. And would you say like, if maybe you're a bit more of like an outgoing person or a quote unquote like loud vibe wise person, maybe in terms of how loudly you speak, but also just kind of like energy, would you then try to represent that through like brighter colors? Or how would you, I guess, let's walk through kind of like different personality types.
Sure.
And then is there any recommendations of like, okay, this type of clothing fits your personality? Now everyone's different and all that kind of stuff, but in terms of like what you want to consider about the types of clothing you wear and maybe the coloring of the clothing you wear for the different types of people out there in the world, personalities, body types, all that kind of stuff, how do you look at what to recommend for them?
That's a great question. I love that you asked that. It actually kind of starts speaking into like everybody in every business has like a prospect or client avatar, like who is the entity that is like your bread and butter, right? Mm-hmm. And for us, there are a few different kinds of guys, and depending on which avatar they are, that will inform some of the suggestions that I would make in terms of the clothing that we'd make for them. So first, I would say like there's the fit guy, which, and I don't mean fit in the modern slang way, but like, you get a guy who's just like, he's got some bodily idiosyncrasies, let's say, that make it really, really difficult for him to buy off the rack clothing. So that's why we have it made for him, because we're going to achieve a superior fit making clothing explicitly for him as opposed to him buying stuff that's off the rack. So we've got the fit guy. There's also, and so anyways, before I go ahead with that, with the fit guy, it might just be like we're sticking with some basics, or like maybe we'll do some brighter colors or bolder patterns if you happen to be a fit guy who's got like a bold and outgoing personality. Or maybe we'll keep the colors quiet and we'll keep the cuts like relatively conservative if you're just on the quieter side. Maybe you're more of an introvert. Like we can use your personality to inform some of the design decisions around that.
And real quick, is that
Yeah.
also too? Then I guess there's like this Venn diagram almost of, because we've talked about this already, where
Mm.
it's like your personality is on one side, but then also like who you're trying to attract is also taken into consideration. So like
Mm.
this is kind of what I was hinting at earlier too, is this idea of, okay, so maybe you're a large personality, but maybe the person you're trying to attract is like not. So is it best to dress for the person that you're trying to attract, or maybe one that represents you the most, or kind of like a blend of both? Or is that even taken into consideration? Or should you just show up authentically, this is me, and whoever's attracted to that is who, whatever, right?
So I think the part that I love the most about my job is actually kind of what you just described. It's really like a puzzle that you have to put together for each individual situation that somebody might be a part of. So when we talk about authenticity, it is always, 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 I would put prime importance on dressing as your most authentic self. People can tell when you're putting on airs, excuse me, they can tell when you're not dressed appropriately for something. There are a number of different ways that, that can shoot you in the foot if you're not dressing authentically. At the same time, you have to keep in mind your audience. You have to keep in mind maybe like the physical space that you're in, the type of event that you might be attending. And the really fun challenge for me is finding like, where is the line where I can have a guy, he's got one foot on this side of the line where he is dressing authentically, and another foot on the other side of the line where he's dressing appropriately for what it is that he's doing. And that's where magic happens. I hate to use such a tired phrase, but that's really where you get somebody who's like, I feel incredible, I feel like myself, and I was not just perfectly in place at whatever thing I was doing. It's like the phrase I like to use is that you stick out, but not like a sore thumb.
Hmm.
You're getting attention for all the right reasons, and that's one thing that makes you memorable. And being memorable is really, really helpful in terms of building relationships.
100%. Yeah, that's the part that I love to kind of explore, is the idea of showing up as your authentic self, but you still have motives, you still have other parties to consider. Where you start to be inauthentic is where you take it to the extreme and you try to be a
Mm.
completely different persona.
Yes.
So there's kind of this middle ground, this slight adjustment of, you know, whether it's showing up online and presenting content through video, or the language you use, in written text, or maybe it's the clothing you wear. Maybe it's clothing that you don't traditionally wear, but you're kind of just optimizing some settings to be like the best version of you in
Mhm.
order to attract your ideal client or spouse or whomever. But it's still within that wheelhouse arena of you. You're not completely crossing over into some other person or trying to mimic the idea of someone else. And like that sweet spot it's tough to, that's where you need to kind of like really have a professional to kind of help you find where that sweet spot is.
I totally agree with you. And it's also worth bringing up something here. I think this is really interesting. And I think that people have an inherent understanding of this, but we might not really talk about it a whole lot, is that everybody plays a number of different roles in their life. So, like me, for example, I'm a leadership level employee of a small business. I am a musician in a band that gigs and plays functions and stuff. I am a husband. I'm a father. I'm somebody's son. I'm somebody's brother. I'm my dog's guy. So like I play a number of different roles in my life, and so does everybody else. and they're all equally authentically me. You know, so I think it's helpful to just kind of lean into that reality and just understand that like work you is maybe a little bit different than play you, is maybe a little bit different than networking event you, like whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And so, yeah, that's I can see where there might be some cognitive dissonance around, like, well, it's if it's me, it's just got to be me, and that's that. And it's like, well, there are there's a handful of yous, and we can address all of them.
Yeah, yeah. I attach that to the idea of that there's different personas of you,
Yeah.
and there's kind of your default persona, which is the person that you are at your house by yourself. No one else is around, and so you can just say and do anything without the worry of a perceiver kind of judging you. But then, as
Mhm.
soon as you kind of step into a public space, you're taking into other considerations, maybe other people who are perceiving you, or just the respect of the environment or the occasion, like you're saying. So, like, yeah, maybe you're a loud, high energy person, but you then step into a funeral setting, and it's more so like the occasion and location
Mhm.
you have to kind of change some of those settings to fit the respect of the situation. And that doesn't mean you are being inauthentic. It just means that you're meeting what's required for that occasion. And so I think that same thing with what you wear. Maybe at business I'm wearing more business casual, or even hoodies or whatnot.
Yeah.
But then if I go to a funeral, right, I'm meeting my wardrobe to meet that occasion. And it's oh, I never see you in suits. Well, that's because this occasion calls for that.
Right, exactly. And that again is like part of your image is not necessarily just what you're wearing, but also understanding what is appropriate for any given occasion. That's what you're communicating there as part of your image is like, this is a guy who has an understanding of societal norms. This is a guy who has an understanding of what is appropriate and what isn't. He knows that there is a time and a place. And really, what that does is that just cements your reputation as, well, basically somebody who's got his act together.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's why I love you mentioned it before, kind of, I believe the ABCs of image.
Well.
And I want to dive into that a little bit more, because we've talked about this before, and you've brought this concept to life. Actually, I created a real video on Instagram about this conversation about the ABCs.
Oh,
So
nice.
I want to expand upon that even further. Again, can you kind of walk us through the ABCs of image, and then what should people, because the idea is really profound in the sense that when we think about our image, we think just how people are looking, our facial expression maybe, and what we're wearing, but there's just so much more to it that everything speaks. And so, yeah, can you just kind of walk us through the ABCs?
Sure, absolutely. So, high level, the ABCs of image: appearance, behavior, and communication. So, appearance, it's pretty self-explanatory. How do you look? So like, are you wearing clothing that fits you well? The patterns are coordinated. The colors are well coordinated. Um, are you groomed appropriately? This is it should be really basic math, but like, have you bathed yourself? Have you brushed and flossed? Have you done something with your hair? Like that kind of stuff. Thankfully, most adult guys don't need a whole lot of guidance on that, but it's worth saying out loud regardless. So, yeah, again, appearance is relatively self explanatory. Behavior is, that would be more kind of what we were talking about with this you showing up to a funeral sort of example, where like, even if you're the most brash, outgoing, flamboyant personality that exists on Earth, the way that you behave at a funeral is going to be completely just like the opposite of that. So, again, how do you comport yourself? Do you have good manners? And this kind of thing will change from region to region, from part of the world to part of the world. Images, and this is
That's fair.
all the ABCs will change regionally,
Mm.
which is a really fascinating thing as well. So behavior is basically how you act. Appearance is how you looked. Behavior is how you act. Communication, excuse me, is, I know you shouldn't use a word to define itself, but it's how you communicate. And communication is, everybody thinks about talking, but there's verbal communication, there's written communication, and crucially, there is nonverbal communication. So, what does that mean? That means body language, that means facial expressions, that means tone of voice when you're speaking. That's why I don't know if you've ever found yourself, you're in a professional situation where you're like, this is starting to get a little sensitive. Like I might need to massage something here. That's the time to get on the phone or to like meet with somebody in person. Because even for those of us who are really well penned, who write extremely well, and they understand the nuances of written language in such a way that they can really minimize confusion, that still leaves a whole lot of room for error when you let somebody read what you've written, as opposed to even on a phone call where, like, while you can't see facial expressions, tone of voice does so much communicating. I heard it broken down once years ago, and of course these percentages are more anecdotal than anything else, but it's like 70% of communication is the words that you say, 25% is your body language, and then 5% is your tone of voice, or like something like that. No, I take that back. It's the other way around. 70% is your body language and facial expressions. 20% is your tone of voice, and then 10% is like the actual words that you say. Right. So the point there is that the words that you're using are relatively unimportant compared to how you're delivering them, and that you can't overstate that. So that's where communication really starts to have an effect on your image. Like, you could be a super well-dressed guy, and you could be really well-mannered and really nice and thoughtful and kind. But if you communicate in a way that's unclear, or maybe if you speak with a regional accent that is from outside the region that you're speaking in, like I'm from the Boston area originally. I used to have a super thick Boston accent. And I moved to Philadelphia 20 some odd years ago. And so I just don't hear it anymore. So now I just kind of talk like a general mid-Atlantic person. But, if I were to walk around here and, ask somebody on the street, where am I going to park my car? Excuse me? Right. So, we start to chip away at like reliability, at credibility, at trustworthiness, that sort of thing. So we have to be mindful of how we communicate as well.
Yeah. No, again, it correlates so well to how we show up online, and especially when we're through our content, because the tonality of our content, obviously, as you're saying, like hop on a call or hop on a Zoom or something like that, so you can see the person's facial expressions, the tonality can get across versus just in written text and such. And that's why we're such big advocates for online personal brands to get in front of the camera and create content, because all those things can be reflected. I mean, all the ABCs are reflected. Your appearance, people can actually see you, and your behavior and the way that you're communicating, all of those things. It's so many more senses are being activated by your audience if you're in front of a camera versus text. And so that's where like the authenticity element to it too, as we continue to come back to it, where if you're truly being genuine, it's like coming from a place you can't control, and you can see that shine through. And especially if you're being passionate about what you're talking about, because that passion is going to drive the facial expressions, it's going to drive the tone in how you communicate. And so you get a better sense of, okay, I like what this person's saying, but I also like the way that they're saying it, because I trust them more. It sounds like they really know what they're talking about. For better or worse, sometimes you can fake it, but that's where that friction comes into place. But the trust factor and the like factor too, because I just feel even like facial expressions, there's some of our favorite like online influencer people make kind of the way that they react to a situation or the way that they say something is like the little what's the word? Idiosyncrasies. Idiosyncrasies. There we go. I'll work on my communication. The idiosyncrasies of someone is where we get that like and trust element to it. And yeah, and people just think communication. It's like, all right, let me send an email. Let me write a blog post or a LinkedIn post that's strictly text, and you never really get to understand that person because you're missing out on all those other elements.
Yeah.
Is there, going back to the idea of well, actually, I want to kind of circle back to where we put a pin in before, where you mentioned the difference between a wardrobe versus what was it?
Oh, fashion versus style.
Yeah, fashion versus style. Can you
Mhm.
walk me through what you mean by that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I actually hear what you said quite a bit. Like, oh, yeah, Mike's in men's fashion. And
Mm,
that's like, technically, I would say it's a word choice here, right? That's part of communication. It is not incorrect. But, like, again, note the choice of word there.
semantics.
So the idea here is that there is fashion and there is style, and they are, tangentially related, but not really the same thing. I like to say that I don't deal in fashion here, but rather style. When we think of it, as I dive in, fashion is very of the moment. What is fashionable? What is in fashion? So that, for my own purposes in my shop here, that could be, oh yeah, GQ is telling us that all the guys are wearing pink bomber jackets with purple polka dots for spring summer 2024, and you should
You
be
heard
doing
it
the
here
same thing.
first, guys.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, don't quote me on that, please. But so it's an extreme example. But the idea is that fashion comes from without. There are a few decision makers at the very, very top of this industry, and they decide what colors are we going to push, what types of garments are we going to push, how are things going to fit now. And you can only recycle
Mm,
those things so many times, and that's why fashion is cyclical. So here I am. I just turned 41 last month. So I'm a child of the late 80s and through the 90s. And so now I walk down the street and I can't believe I'm saying like young people, but I see young people
yeah,
dressing the same way that we dressed back when I was in like middle school and high school.
yeah.
I was like, wow, baggy clothes are coming back. I see girls like wearing chokers and stuff. Like it's crazy. But I guess at some point you get old enough to see it all come full circle. So fashion, basically, it needs newness to survive.
Mm.
Because if there isn't anything new, then stores don't have anything to sell and they go out of business and then we're all kaput. Style, while fashion comes from without, whereas style, excuse me, comes from within. So with style, I am not really concerned with what GQ is telling us to wear, with what Esquire is telling us to wear, what Men's Health is saying, or like anything out in the zeitgeist. Style is where I am concerned with what's your build, what's the coloring in your face, what's the shape of your face, what do you do professionally, who are you as a person, what's your personality like, that sort of thing. And I use those kinds of things to create garments that are, I admit, rooted in a more like a traditional Western idiom. Like the suit and tie that I'm wearing is like, this is this is of the West, and like not another part of the world. And I say that only as like kind of a statement of fact. It is completely free of any judgment. We live in a Western society, so this is how we dress. That's all.
Sure.
So my job as somebody who deals in style is to figure out who this person is as a physical body, and then who this person is as a personality, and kind of mix that all up in a cauldron and say, okay, these are the things that you should be wearing. The goal is that no matter what I dress you in, you will look your best and like correct now, 10 years from now. And if I could put you in a time machine 50 years ago. So that's that's really the idea there, that style comes from within and is permanent, whereas fashion comes from without and is fleeting.
I want to just take a moment right now, because for everyone listening, and I hope it's many people,
About millions, I'm sure.
all the million listeners today, what Mike just said is the biggest lesson when it comes to not just, you know, fashion versus style in real life, but let's correlate that to online personal branding,
Yeah, I want to hear
because
this.
what we do as personal branders day one is we typically come in to the online space and we look for what is currently fashionable, which is the current trend. We look at what our top influencers in the space are doing, and we go, that seems to be in fashion, so let me do that too, and I'll fit in. But what Mike's saying here is we're not focused on fashion, we're focused on style. And style, as he put it, is something that would be true to you, authentic to you 50 years ago, and will be true to you 50 years from now. And so the trend may change, but if you're focused on fashion slash trends, then you're constantly chasing a pendulum of an ever changing arena.
Yeah.
But if you focus on style, which is, again, all those things we talked about earlier in the podcast about who you are, your personality, your ideal fit, then you're never chasing something. You're just staying in line with what is true to you the entire time. And that's what people are going to resonate with. So
Mm-hmm.
I just love everything that you just said in terms of fashion versus style, because I'm glad we covered that, because this is exactly the problem that happens in the online space, where people are constantly chasing the trend or the new fashion style.
Mm.
And now they're getting too wrapped up in something that isn't necessarily them. And then they don't know what them is, when really you should just be focused on your style and stay consistent in that. And then as things change, you're never out of style, because it's always just whatever you is authentic to you. So
Yeah.
I love all of that.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, it's and it can be hard when you don't know what to do. Everything that we're talking about right now, like, yeah, it sounds great. And then the question is like, okay, Dave, how? That's like, how do you accomplish this? And I think that's where, like, having a consultant like yourself or like myself, where it's like, I have dedicated a lot of my life to to clothing, and I truly do believe in its transformative power. I absolutely do. But there's a whole lot that goes into, like, okay, well, what does XYZ dress code mean? What's the difference between black tie and black tie optional?
Mm.
What kinds of garments should would be wearing for this type of thing? And forget about, like, how do you hold a tape on a body? How do you know how to look at a body and say, like, okay, this guy actually doesn't have prominent shoulder blades. He actually just pushes them back and it creates a hollow in his back, like something, that kind of thing that we use to achieve a much better fit of clothing than you would otherwise. These are things that, like, most people don't have the time
Mm-hmm.
or the willingness, understandably, to educate themselves on the finer points of this stuff, because it's a lot. People are busy with their own lives. They have husbands, wives, kids, families, jobs, pets, like other stuff that they want to do. Maybe they're super into, I don't know, chess, and they're in a chess club 3 days a week, or whatever the case may be. They don't have the time to educate themselves on, like, these are internet personal branding best practices. Forget about, like, how to build a website or how to optimize it for SEO.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, is most people, they want to get into the space. They want to look nice, or they want to start an online personal brand. But yeah, there is that hurdle between the desire and then all the things they know would have to come in place, that they would have to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big thing that, I feel as well, is there's this distinction between information and knowledge.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, they could read a blog post or watch a YouTube video about, style and the right fit and clothing and all that kind of stuff. But to apply it is still very difficult, and getting it right the first time. And so now they're going out and buying the things they think are right,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe it doesn't fit as well as it could have, or it's not the right color and all that kind of stuff. Now you just wasted time and money.
Yep.
Somewhat, because now at least you're starting to apply the things that you've learned in real life. You have the bad experience. Now you could quit there and say, what, screw it, I'll just keep wearing my hoodies. Or you can continue to try to learn and apply. And then just over time, that experience of failing and learning, then you get better at understanding what's a better fit for me. You
Yeah.
you go out and wear something you feel comfortable in and get compliments back, and so you go, okay, I'm on the right track. So there's that. You could take that entire experience,
Hmm.
and again, that's time and money. But the reason that people come to consultants, experts, is because they've already done the experience. They've already had the lived experiences. They've already gone through all of this, and they're kind of the bridge between where you are now and where you want to get to, and cut out that middleman of time and money to have to go through all of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I get on phone calls with guys, especially guys who are getting dressed for their weddings, because there are often some like semi-strict guardrails. The color scheme is X, and the flowers are this, and here's the venue, and the time of year, and the time of day, and there's a lot to consider. And some of these poor guys that I talk to, my head tailor here at the shop. We have in-house tailors here. Our master tailor is a guy named Edgar, and he's from Guatemala. And I think that this is like, it's a translation from Guatemalan Spanish that he uses. And he always says, like, don't break your head over this. And so, yeah, like I've never used that in English. But like immediately
Yeah.
I was like, yes, it completely makes sense. Like these guys are breaking their heads over like, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to wear? And it's like, so you have to understand that I think the more I do this, the longer I'm in this industry, the more I understand that the biggest value add that I provide is that like you don't have to do that mental labor anymore. That's my job.
Mhm.
That's part of the service that we do here. And I don't want you to come to me and say like, I need a blue suit. And I say, okay, here are 3 blue fabrics. I like this one. It's like, no, you're here to tell me, I think this is what I need, or rather, this is the situation that I'm in.
Right.
Okay, it's my job to ask questions and then ask more questions and then ask more questions until I get the information that I need to say, okay, these are the things that you need to wear. Here are my suggestions. What do you think?
Right.
So,
Well, this has been amazing. And if people were interested, or say, I guess men specifically were interested in really representing themselves authentically and finally feeling comfortable and confident in their clothing, how could they find you either online, in real life, to connect with you and learn more?
sure, sure. One thing that I think is worth mentioning is that, yes, I do make menswear. However, I do not limit my clientele to men, although they are, of course, the vast majority. Anyone of any gender who wants to wear men's clothing, we welcome with open arms. So just
Right.
throwing that out there.
Sure.
So to get in touch with me, of course, our website is henrydavidson.com. So there's no A in there. henrydavidson.com. You can email me anytime at M as in Michael and my last name Oxman at henrydavidson.com. You can give us a buzz at 215-253-5905. We're here. Leave us a voicemail if we don't pick up, and we'll get back to you.
Awesome. Mike, this has been awesome. I knew we were going to have a good conversation
Likewise,
today,
man.
and
Yeah.
it did not miss. So I appreciate your time today, man.
Likewise. Absolutely. I appreciate you having me.